Welcome back. Once again, it is time for another tutorial. We're going to cover the last stage of setting up your manual textures by doing normal maps today. This will be a little bit simpler than doing your specular maps, but it is a bit of a process. I'm going to go through sort of the step-by-step of what I do to make sure your normals give you a nice 3D effect, keep your textures from looking flat once they're in the game. So I've got a texture here from my 5mm rifle, and this is a good one because it has some different features, some normal maps of different depths, so we can sort of experiment and show you how to get those different effects. So to start off, you can see over here I have all of my different layers from just making the original diffuse. And I'm going to start from here, but I want to group them into sort of pieces. So what I'm going to start by is sort of isolating the different things that I want to have different depths of normal map. Now, what do I mean by depth of normal map? Well, what your normal map actually does in the game is take all of these little scratches and whatnot, or like the holes in the screws, stuff like that, and it gives it an illusion of having depth. Now, some of these things I'm going to want to have a lot more depth, like these holes in these sort of screws over here, these hex screws, and some of it I'm going to want to have a lot less depth, like the wearing along the edges. I want that to be noticeable but not deep. And we can use different normal settings to get those effects. So my base map on this, my base texture is just that metal at the bottom. So I'm going to hide everything else to start with. And I just want my dodge layer, or my two dodge layers on there. Just that one. And I want to make sure I don't have any of the screws or anything like that that is going to overlap that. So this is just going to give me my metal texture and my wear along the edges of it. We're going to want to flatten this into a single layer. That's pretty simple. I'm just going to go over and go to merge visible layers. Okay. So now I can start. This will give me sort of the baseline, and then I can do my details on top of it. So in filters, we're going to go to map. And bump map does something similar, but we need a plugin. We need the normal map plugin to work properly with Fallout 4, which I will put in the description. Now, when I do my settings for a normal map, I try to change as little as possible. So I'm just going to set the minimum Z to 0.4, and I'm not going to change anything else. I'm only going to mess with the scale from here on out. So for this base metal, I usually go, if I want it to be more smooth, I go with a 2. If I want the wear to stand out a little bit more, I could go with a 4. So I'm going to apply this, and we'll take a look at it. Now what you see here is it looks like the wear and tear, sort of where there were edges on my stuff, it looks like they're indented. It looks like they've been pressed into this material. Now, the thing about normal maps is that you actually want them to appear the opposite of the effect you want to have in game. So I do want those edges to be sort of worn in, like material's been scraped off. So in game, I do want those to be sort of embedded, to be look like they're cut out. But on your normal map, you want it to be the opposite. So instead of doing this, I'm going to go back. I'm going to re-show normal map, and instead of doing +4, I'm just going to set this to -4. So now the details that I want to be cut into my material in the game are going to appear to be popping out on the normal map, and that's what we want. So 4 is usually a good baseline. Go 2 or 3 if you want it to be a little bit smoother, but I like mine to be kind of roughed up a little bit. But now we got to find our other details. So there's a couple other things that I'm going to cover here before I sort of jump ahead to show you the effect of it. But this gives us our base. But if I want to do some details, I need to find those. So like this, these are some interior sections. For this, I want the same. I'm literally just going to repeat normal map on those. Again, on this one, we're just going to repeat the same thing. Nope, I forgot to select that one. There we go. But when we get to something like... maybe I can find some screws. There they are. So I have these two layers, which are these hex screws, which have a really dark detail. But I want them to actually look like that hole in the middle has some depth. So if I zoom in here, you can kind of see they've got a little bit of a rim around the edge, and then a really black hole in the middle that we want to appear to be actually a hole. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to use that normal map set up with the minimum Z. I'm just going to adjust the scale. So I'm going to pull this down to 10. You shouldn't really ever have to do more than 10. And I still have it selected on the wrong layer. There we go. So now you can see this makes it appear that the edges around the hex screw, the hole that the hex screw has, appear to be popping out. So we probably don't want that. Let's pull it back down the other direction at 10. Now it looks like that hole is popping out. That's what we want. Remember, we want the opposite of the effect in the game. So now it looks like that hole in the middle is popping out. That should work fine. It should give us some depth once we get it into the game. So then I can go up here again and just repeat normal map. Now another thing you can do, if I can find my lines, is if you want like an engraving of like text or something along those lines. In my case, I have these lines here, that line there, those are just other screws, we won't worry about those. And somewhere on here, I thought I had some text. There it is, okay. So here's the thing. I'm going to do these lines and this text as, well, the text will be an engraving and the lines will be sort of a cut where it looks like there's a seam where parts connect to each other. So rather than having to model that, I can actually do that through the texture. This is a little bit more effective if your texture is higher res. Mine's a little bit low res, but it'll come out okay. We'll see the results a little bit later. So you'll notice that these lines are purely just black lines painted on, and my text is purely just a gray text. So what we're going to need to do here, since the normal map uses a color difference to determine how to adjust the depth, we're going to use the drop shadow effect to make a offset of two sort of extremes on the color axis. So if I have these black lines, I'm going to use the drop shadow effect and make sure that I'm actually looking at one of these layers. In light and shadow here. So they're black, so I'm going to use a really light gray for my drop shadow color. You don't really want to use white or pure black when you're doing a drop shadow for this case because it can sort of overdo your bump map. I want to set these to 0. And my blur radius way down. So now if I can find the one that's actually being affected. Oh, is this it? That appears to be it. So maybe I'll go even a little bit lighter. Almost white. And my blur radius, we'll just take that down to 0. And we're going to turn the opacity way up. 1 was probably fine. Going higher than that, it's a little bit extreme. So I'm going to go apply that to all of my lines here with Control F. And you'll see that now all of these have some sort of drop shadow. Except one of them, for some reason. So once you do that, and you want to apply your normal map, you'll note, actually this might be good that one didn't apply because I can show you what happens if you don't have that depth showing. So if I apply this, and we're going to go with 10 because this is supposed to be a cut, so we want it to be deep. You'll see with that drop shadow, it actually gives us a clear cut. It gives us a difference between the two tones, and we're able to get that sort of extreme change between them. Now, that looks like 10 might have been a little bit too much, so we're going to turn it down to maybe 6 or so. That looks a little bit better. And again, like I said, these lines were a little bit pixelated. A smoother line or a higher resolution line will actually turn out better. When I actually did this, I cleaned this up before I did my normal map. So that might be something you want to do to smooth it out. But if I do one of these that does not have the normal map applied, which are now not showing for some reason. Okay, so this one. If we look at this and apply it without the drop shadow, you notice that it's there. We have a much more shallow cut. We don't have that extreme. So if you do want just like a scratch in a specific place, that's going to be fine. You can still just use that dark line, maybe add some noise to it, which can be helpful to create some depth, because again, the normal map is using color difference to determine the depth. So if you don't want that deep of a cut, you just want sort of a shallow difference, you can still do that. But if you want a deep cut, if you want like to section off part of your object, you're going to want to create that color difference on your lines. Now we can go to the text here and we can do the same thing. So this text is rather light. So when I do this drop shadow, I'm just going to use a really dark gray, like practically black. Again, using the extremes sometimes messes with the normal map generator, so I'm not going to go all the way to white or all the way to black. If it will let me highlight this. There we go. Okay. And our blur radius all the way down. And bring our opacity up. Now if you want to have a less extreme cut, if you want something to be embedded in a more sort of shallow, gradual fashion, you can still use this drop shadow and turn the blur radius up. But for right now, because this is an engraving, we're going to keep it all the way down here. And actually, let's put this at about, say, 0.5. That should work all right. Okay. And when I do normal map for this, We'll keep it at that 6. Now that looks like it's embedded again, so I might need to jump back, re-show normal map. Now, the simple way is to just switch this to negative, but technically you can also invert these, and that will change your setting to go the opposite direction as well. So there, I have my text kind of popping out there, so when it's on the rifle in the game, it will look like it's embedded. I could make that more extreme if I wanted to, but this will be fine for now. And there you have it. Pretty much for normal maps, you just need to separate out the different sections that you want to have different depths. And then make sure that there is a color difference for the generator to actually work with. Drop shadow works really well if you have something that has sort of a solid color around the edges to make it stand out from whatever's behind it. So I use that to make like a rim of a lighter or darker color to make sure that that pops out separate from whatever is behind it. So real quick, I'm going to jump into the game and show you what it looks like. But before we do that, we'll export, obviously. And for normal maps, we want to set to _n DDS. And for this, we are going to use either, well, I recommend BC5 unless you have a different program that you can run your format through, in which case you want to use BC7. BC3 will also work, but you might get some pixelation out of it, which is sometimes noticeable on your item in the game. Be aware that BC5 does add sort of like a blue filter, so if you feel like you're going to have to come back and modify this later, just keep it as like a PNG or something. Keep a separate one that you can test with that isn't formatted for the game yet. So we would do here and make sure you have MIP maps, and there we go. Alright, I'll show you what it looks like in the game, and you should be pretty much good to go. So, here in the game, if I pop up the weapon that I was working on with that texture, you can see on the back there you have those grooves from the black lines, you have the indentation, the cross in the screw in the back there that has at least some depth to it. If I move, you can see those grooves actually generate a shadow on the appropriate side, even though it's actually just 2D. The normal map tells it that there should be some depth there, and will actually create sort of a false shadow to give that illusion. And you can sort of see along the edges. I went pretty shallow with the wear and tear on the edges on this gun. I think I only went with like a 2 or a 3. So that wear and tear isn't really extreme, but if you wanted more, if you wanted to actually look like that's chipped off, you could do a 4 or a 5. And then when you combine that with your specular map and your diffuse map, you get some nice weathering where you've got some different shades where metal has been sort of buffed or scraped. You get some depth to those scratches. You can make it look like pieces of paint have been chipped off, things along those lines. It all just matters kind of what you're doing with the depth. On this one, you can see that I have some sort of like grip on the adjustment knobs for the sights, and that illusion that it actually has depth, that isn't just a flat texture. That's done through the normal map as well. So really anything that you want that is sort of a small detail that doesn't require modeling, but you want it to look like there's a little bit of depth to it, or even have it popping out a little bit. So like the screw towards the back there, I have that popping out a little bit for the screw, and then embedded back in for the hole in the screw. It's just a matter of which way you set that normal map depth. So if maybe we can zoom in here a little bit to inspect. You can see different parts. Up towards the barrel, I have sort of a screw on the back of those sights that I guess I can't get a good view of. But this little detail over here is all just normal map. There's no actual modeling done to make that little circle, which I think you can see sort of on the rifle itself. So that's the kind of stuff you can do with it. The more you experiment, the more you'll sort of figure out sort of like the special things that you can accomplish through the combination of your 3 different texture layers. But that should be good to go for your normal maps. Good luck. If you're still trying to do your specular maps, if you decide to do this second, go ahead and check out the tutorial for that, which I'll also link in the description.